Recording, and we are now going to throw this right back to Wim. I'm so sorry for the disruption.
No problem at all. Can you still see my screen though?
I'm coming to you now. You're now the host. Yep, you're good. I'm not seeing your screen. Throw the screen back up, if you will.
There you go. Let's see if that.
There we are.
All right, perfect. So I never installed the FileMaker Server because as a typical developer, I developed my thing and it tested beautifully when I ran it and all of that stuff when I did my demos. And at the time, we had FileMaker Server 3, and I had to install it on a Windows NT4 that they bought brand new for me, and I installed it. And at the time, you may remember this is one of those VHS Betamax things, is when it came to network protocol, you had to pick between IPX and TCP/IP. TCP/IP was the newfangled thing, so why use that, right? So I picked IPX, and the thing didn't, it worked. Like when the users went to open the hosted solution from their workstations, it worked just fine, but it was dreadfully slow. It took minutes to open that solution. And I was sweating bullets because everybody was looking at me like, that's what you spent the last 3 months on? Really? That's what we're paying you for? And I couldn't understand where that came from, right? So I swore an oath to myself that that would never happen to me again, right? So clearly there was something different between developing a solution and putting it on the server and making sure that it ran just fine. Because really that's where the client gets their value from, right? They don't get their value from you sitting there in your office, devising nice screens and coding very cool scripts. That's absolutely critical and essential, but it's really when it's hosted on the server and they can pound at it that they will get their value from it, right? And they'll get their value over a much longer period of time than we typically spend developing. So that's the backdrop. I swore that I would never be caught out again like that, and I've been heavily invested in learning about servers and FileMaker Server in particular, right? So some of the information that you'll get from the engineering speaks to that, right? Well, they'll talk about things that that you can do on the server side, things you can do on your solution to make it performant and secure and safe and all of these things. So keep an eye on that one. All right. So this is a knowledge base article that they published back in February, I think, where they outlined their new support policy. And we talked about this last month when we talked about some of the FileMaker 19 features. It is important to call it out again, because in about 2 months from now, at the end of September or somewhere in September, they're not calling out a date. Both FileMaker 16 and 17 will be end of life, right? So that'll be it. No more support for 16 and 17 at the same time, which has never happened before, right? So typically they get staggered so that when one version becomes end of life, it's only the one version. Now there's going to be two that are going to be nixed at the same time. So 16 and 17 are going away. Well, their support for 16 and 17 is going to go away in September. That leaves really 18 and 19 as the supported versions. So keep that in mind. Also, when they release 19 in May, May, it's the last of the big ones, right? So from that point forward, we will have some incremental releases, and we don't know what they'll look like, whether they'll call them 19.1 and 19.2 and 19.3 or 2020.3 as they have them there in the support article. But what it means is, and I come back to a question that was asked as we were chatting before the meeting, is we won't have the luxury anymore of treating every new release like we have in the past, where you give it 3 months or 4 months and you wait for response or feedback from this community and from the FileMaker community at large about how stable it is or what it means, right? Because typically the old releases where you get one big dump of features and they remain stable until 12 months from now when you get the next big batch of features. And in the meantime, you only get bug fixes and maybe some performance fixes and all of that stuff. That's not going to be the case anymore, right? So now every 3 months, really every quarter, we can expect a release that will have both bug fixes and new features, right? So every new feature, every new release from here on forward will have that strange mix of new things and fixing old things. And like I said, what it really means is that we have to be, we have to realize that that's the fact. So we can't really say, well, I don't like 19 as it is now. It's there's no vref on it yet, so I'll wait for the next one. Well, the next one, there will be a next one, clearly, but it may introduce new stuff, right? So it's not going to be a stability release like we've had in the past. So keep that in mind going forward. The landscape of those releases is changing, and the way that we deploy is going to change with that. What it means for us developers, and especially those of us who are deeply into deployments and do this for a living, so to speak, is that time frame shortens, right? So to make that decision whether or not to use 19 is now shorter than it has in the past. So that's something to keep in mind.
In FileMaker Server 17, the data admin API is going to end of life as of September of this year, right?
Sorry, for which one is that, you mean?
FileMaker Server 17's admin API, the trial, that ends September 27th of this year. Or
I thought it already was the end of life.
It already expired.
The API for 17. Yep. All right, so when we look at 19 specifically and the new features, and we've covered a lot of the new features, and Chris will cover some more new features in the second half of this session. When it comes to FileMaker Server, there isn't really a big, massive set of new features, right? Yes, in WebDirect we have support for card windows, and that's huge. That's big. It really makes developing WebDirect solutions so much easier. Card windows are great. So obviously that's big, and you only get that when you deploy 19 because you'll get the WebDirect for 19. But other than that, there isn't really a lot that is going on. Some of the things that we'll touch on later, there's some subtle changes that they have made. One of them has to do with stability, right? So in 18, they introduced that data restoration feature that goes hand in hand with a better parallel processing, right? So you get to use more cores more frequently. And because it spawns more threads, there's a risk that those threads get into a funky situation. So FileMaker introduced the data restoration, and it was meant to safeguard your files, to basically restore your files to a pristine state if your FileMaker server crashed. Turns out that the data restoration feature wasn't as stable, and that was actually causing grief, which is why the best practice for 18, when you install it, is turn it off as soon as you can. Only turn it back on if you can really set up a sandbox test bed for your solution, and if you're able to generate enough load on it to verify that the data restoration feature or the lack of stability in that is not going to bite you in your particular deployment. So best practice for 18 is turn it off, right, as soon as you install it. And because FileMaker or Claris hasn't been able to fix the underlying issue in that, so you still have the feature in 19, but now it's turned off by default, right? So that's a change in behavior of 19 versus 18. So you don't have to go in and turn it off. It's already off by default.
Rotates. It becomes like a helicopter.
Quickly log in here quickly, and I'll show you one other big feature. And if you heard me participate in any of the forums that we have, FM forums or the community forum or FM Soup or any of the other ones, every time that there is an issue with FileMaker Server or somebody's solution is slow, you'll hear me say, well, what do the logs say, right? It's the logs, and FileMaker Server keeps many logs, and the operating system has a lot of logs as well. So these logs are crucial, right? They're critical in any troubleshooting effort, and not just troubleshooting, but also to establish a baseline, right? Once you've deployed your solution on the server, enable all the logs that you can so that you can gather enough information to know what your normal is. So that if somebody complains or you feel that your performance is degrading over time, that you have something to compare against, right? So logging is critical. When they gave us the new admin console, or at least the new admin console look and feel like they have when they introduced 17, a lot of the toggles to turn on the logs, the various logs that FileMaker Server have, disappeared, right? So they were relegated to either an admin API call or a command line. So we didn't have them in the admin console. With 19, they did bring back the server statistics one, right? So this one here, it's still off by default, unfortunately. So The first thing you do when you install a 19 is you go in here, you toggle it on. It should be the absolutely first thing that you do. Make sure that that thing is toggled on. Once you toggle it on, it remains on, so you're fine. So you never have to come back. But that is the absolute critical log that you have to turn on, right? So I'm glad that they brought it back, at least the toggle, that they brought it back into the admin console. I would wish that they turn it on by default. So they'll leave that up to you. But that's new, right? So that's new to 19 that you have it.
It's a FileMaker meeting. Zoom in.
If you have FileMaker 18 or 17, 17 is going to be somewhat irrelevant. Somebody should put themselves on mute there.
Yeah, please mute if you're not asking a question, guys.
All right, so if you happen to have FileMaker 18 or 17, one of the great commands that you can use is FMS admin get server prevs. All right, so when you use that one, you'll get a very nice overview of all of the server configuration settings that some of them actually, I was going to say, yes, some of them, only a handful of them are available in the admin console, but the other ones you have to set from here, right? So if you happen to have 18, like I said, you would do FMS admin set server prevs, and then do which is the use stats log. It's this one. Set that one to true, and you can daisy chain your settings, right? So if this was 18, you would set this one to false. So in essence, that command that you're looking at now, that's sort of like the basic command that I do on an 18 box, right? Because I cannot turn off the data restoration from the admin console. I can also not turn on the stats log from the admin console. So this is the command that I do when I install a FileMaker server from scratch. You can do it with 19 too. Obviously, it works the same in 18 or 19, but this will turn on the critical stats log and it will turn off the data restoration feature right there. One of the nice things about this command here is that you can see what the settings are, the current settings, but you can also see what the default is, and you can see what the allowable range is. So this is actually really great, and you have them all there in one nice area, right? So the FMS admin get server prefs and set server prefs to change them. And then when you run the command, you'll get a confirmation as to what the current state is, and what the current setting is, and what the default was as well there, right? So so that's a really nice thing to look at. I'll come back to this command there. The log that we've always had in the admin console, the one that you can toggle on and off from the admin console, is the top call stats log, right? The top call stats log is it's a great log. I think that the regular stats log, the one that they call server statistics, is actually a little more critical, because that one, and the default logging interval is 30 seconds, meaning that every 30 seconds, FileMaker Server will write an entry to the log files, all the log files, not the event log because that's event driven, but the top call stats log, client stats log, and the regular stats log all will get a new entry every 30 seconds. The regular server statistics log basically gives you a metric for all your typical bottlenecks. Every server, whether it's FileMaker Server or any other server, has your 4 potential bottlenecks, right? It's going to be processing power, disk I/O, memory usage, or network throughput. And FileMaker Server gives metrics on all of those, and it captures those in the stats log. And that's sort of like the same metrics that we were used to be able to see in the FileMaker 16 console and before. So those goes in the stats log. The top call stats log is a little different. It gives pretty much the same metrics, but it does it on a per operation basis. So for every 30 seconds, for every login interval, it will collect the 25 most expensive operations that happened during that interval and will log those, right? So it's a great log to give you a head start on troubleshooting what is expensive. Like, what is it in your solution that is slow, right? Expensive meaning consuming resources more resources than any other operation that has happened in that login interval. The thing to remember here is that it limits itself to the 25 most expensive ones, meaning that if you have a busy server with many users doing a good set of operations like creating records, running scripts, be it what it is there, the 25 most expensive things will not give you a nice chain of operations. It'll not say, hey, it's that script, right? Because it's broken down into what FileMaker Server considers a call, and a call is a find query, or it's something that is going to be part of what the user is doing, right? It's not saying Wim is doing a manual find on this field, and here's the criteria that he used to perform that find. That's unfortunately not what it gives you, but it gives you a head start in making or locating what is expensive. So that's the topical stats log. Right? You can turn that on. You'll get this usual warning here. Claris is a little paranoid that the act of logging is going to have an effect on the performance of your server. And obviously it does, right? Because if you ask the server to do something additional, like logging, it has to expend resources to make that happen. So that's what this warning is about. And because they were a little paranoid about that, when you restart FileMaker Server in 18, 17, 16 has that same log as well, then this would turn itself off automatically, right? In 19, that's different. 19, as when you enable the topical stats log, it'll remain enabled going forward, just like the regular stats log, which always remained enabled and will survive FileMaker Server restart. So the topical stats log now does the same, which is great. I like that. I've never been paranoid, or not paranoid at the same level as Claris engineers have been, about enabling the client stats log and the topical stats log, because if your server is already marginal, then yes, the act of logging could have an effect on the machine itself, but that's really not the fault of the logging. It's because the server is already badly marginal to begin with, right? And then it's better to find out if the logging makes it fall over, then make it fall over. There's probably no clear sign that you should pick a server that has a little more resources than you otherwise have. All right. We'll come back towards the end of the session on this external authentication. Stephen Blackwell and I have been writing a great many white papers since the last DEF CON on extending, especially these three, right? So we've had this for a while, where you can use Amazon accounts, Google accounts, and Azure AD accounts to authenticate users into your solution. What we've discovered and what we've explained in those white papers, and this is a great feature of FileMaker Server, and we've been working with Claris to make it so that they take away this little UI and make it more generic, so that you can set up one login, Alt0, Centrify, Ping, Okta, in a fashion where it's going to be reflected better that you're using this identity provider. It's a critical feature. It's one of those things, and we've already used it to great success in big companies, where having this feature where you can leverage their chosen identity provider to authenticate the FileMaker users is the one thing that keeps FileMaker in play. And this is going to get a lot more traction, especially in this day and age where the typical security defenses have been the perimeter ones, right? Like you have your building, your office building, and you make sure that your network is protected because your network is there, right? It's a physical network that is located in one location, one physical location, and you can protect that by not giving people access to that. In this day and age with COVID and isolation, people working from home, those traditional perimeter defenses are not as effective anymore, right? Because now you have users dispersed throughout the country, throughout the world potentially, that need access to your resources. And Stephen has been writing and blogging about this in the past for the longest time. The concept of zero trust, but also more importantly, the concept of that the identity becomes the new security border and your new parameter is key. And these identity providers like Ping, like Okta, like Azure AD, those are major players, and they are becoming much more prevalent. And what it means is that your clients will be asking you about this. And the one thing that I want you to remember from this, and I'll show you some of the blog posts and I'll point you to the white papers. The one thing that I want you to remember is when your client asks you about this, all you need to know is that it's possible and you can already do this. This works going back to FileMaker Server 17. So this is not new to 19. It wasn't new in 18 either. The underlying mechanism that is built into FileMaker Server can be used to authenticate users into the solutions with a great number of identity providers, and your clients will be asking about this, so be ready for that, and it's already working just fine. I'll circle back to this.
Wim, a quick question about that, Jonathan.
Sure.
I know when this feature came out that only one of them supported groups. You know, I've used external authentication with OD and AD for years, and obviously groups was sort of central to that deployment. Yep. And I remember being disappointed that what was it? It was only Azure that supported groups. Is that right?
Correct.
Is that still the case? And is that the case with some of the additional? I've seen the white papers that you and Stephen have written, but haven't delved into them because I haven't had a need. Do those other identity providers support groups, or is it individual users only?
No, they pretty much all support groups, which is the great thing. Actually, Stephen and I are working on an addendum, a new white paper in this series where we're using sign-in with Apple. And that's an odd duck because the sign-in with Apple basically means you can use your Apple ID to log into the FileMaker solution. And that's an odd duck because Apple IDs don't have the concept of groups, right? Like Azure AD, because really it's a full-blown directory service, has concepts of groups. So you can use groups, and FileMaker Server will honor those. So things like ping, Okta1 login, Auth0, they all support groups, so which is great, right? Because you can limit the complexity inside your FileMaker solution. You don't have to have matching accounts in FileMaker for each of those individual accounts. They all work with groups. Now, the beauty of Amazon and Google accounts, the individual ones, is that once you pick one of those other external identity providers, you can use something like identity brokerage, identity delegation and federation to put something in between your FileMaker Server and Amazon and Google so that you can now use groups even with Amazon accounts and Google accounts. So there's really no end of power that you get with those external identity providers. We also have it set up that you can use things like YubiKeys, right? Like make it completely passwordless. So your users don't even have to have a password anymore to log into your FileMaker solution. Things like ping, Okta, Auth0, these are all cloud services, meaning that you have to subscribe to them. Auth0, for instance, has a really great free tier. The other ones are for pay. In one of the, I guess it's the one where we are using the security keys and the YubiKeys, we're showing an on-premise version, Red Hat's Keycloak, that I mentioned, I believe, last time as well, which you can install and run by yourself. So you don't have to pay for one of those identity providers that has all these features, including groups, including delegation, federation, brokering, and all of that good stuff. So it's powerful. I can fill 2 sessions on talking with on nothing but that. But the reason that I go on about it is that it's a critical feature because your clients will be asking you about it, and it's already in FileMaker Server. It has been for a while, and it's working like a charm. So if you can remember that one, that's my mission done for today.
Wim, is Okta working well?
Okta is working extremely well. It's one of the easier ones to set up. It's one of the most transparent ones. They have great native testing tools internally. We have a great number of clients. I have a big client in LA actually that is using Okta with FileMaker, and it's a huge client, a national brand name that you all know, and I can safely say the fact that we can integrate with Okta is the one thing that extended FileMaker's life in that company, because they threw it at us in sort of like an attempt to throw us off and say, well, if you can't do this, then FileMaker is out. And then we without blinking, we could say, yep, we got it set up. And setting this up really, well, obviously, if your first time, it takes a little longer, but it takes maybe 30 minutes and you're done. So it's not even technically complex to do that. All right.
Do we have any papers on setting it up with Okta?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have a complete step-by-step in one of those white papers. Actually, I can, you have a, this is the blog post that, that introduces that passwordless thing. At the bottom of it, you actually have links to all of the white papers and each addendum that, that talks for that. Stephen Dolensky, FM Forum, he's hosting the actual PDF downloads of these white papers. So you can get them there. They have step-by-step on all of this stuff. So it's pretty, pretty good. All right, so what's on the screen now is, this is one of those not published features in 19. This is new to 19. This speaks to the data API, right? So, and this is a feature that will, if you have a heavy duty use of the data API, this is one of these things that can make it more performant. Now, the thing with the data API is that underneath, as you may know, it's a Node server, right? Node.js. A lot of the new FileMaker Server stuff is based on Node. The admin console, the admin API, the data API, they all go through Node.js. And sitting there somewhere is what is called a thrift server, right? So when you make calls to the data API, they actually go to a thrift server who will manage the connection pool and the threads and all of that good stuff. This is a knowledge base article that explains how you can tweak the thrift server settings to basically ramp up more sessions, more concurrent sessions. So this may come in handy if you have heavy duty use of your data API, or if you're really pounding it with different connections at the same time. This will come in handy, and just something to be aware of that you can do in 19. On the tech spec side, there's really haven't been any changes in 19, right? It's still the same old technical limitations, both in the what a FileMaker file could look like, but also on the FileMaker server side, number of connections, maximum number of concurrent connections, all of these things, they're pretty much all the same. So no huge changes there. This sort of brings us to the different flavors of FileMaker Server that we have, right? So what we have here is, this is FileMaker Server 19 running on AWS, Windows Server 2019. So that's basically your basic on-premise FileMaker Server. What we have here is the Linux version of FileMaker Server, right? So the Linux version is in preview. So it's free for all, really. You just need to sign up and get it. Runs on CentOS. This one actually runs in AWS as well. You can just check out an CentOS image and install it from there. Installing, actually, I can show some of that. I'm not going to show you how to install this, but if I make my connection to my Penguin here. As you can see, it's Linux, right? So there's no UI. Yes, you can install a UI on Linux and do it all from there. That's really not the point of having a Linux server. So you'd have to get comfortable a little bit with the command line, all of that good stuff. Once you're in and once you have it installed, it really behaves and feels very much like the FileMaker servers that we have on macOS and Windows. You have the same folder structure. Everything is in the same place. You can do plugins with this one too. Obviously, they would have to be the Linux version of the plugins, right? So the macOS version of the plugin won't work here. Most vendors have a Linux version of their plugin. They have them because the old FileMaker Cloud, which is now FileMaker Cloud for AWS, it was using the exact same operating system, right? So that was CentOS. Actually, the FileMaker Cloud as it is now, the FileMaker Cloud 2.0, is using the exact same operating system and the exact same, well, I was going to say the exact same server. That's not entirely true. We'll highlight some of the differences between the different flavors, but this really is just the same thing that they use under the hood. What this one means is that, and obviously we're still in preview, so we're still testing, we're still putting it through its paces to see how it holds up. Anecdotally, it is faster than anything you can put on macOS and Windows. it's a given that anybody who offers cloud hosting services for FileMaker, predictive computing, Soliant, any of the other ones, they will all migrate to Linux, right? Because obviously they can make these instances smaller, less expensive. There's no Windows licensing to contend with. Because it's all command line driven, you can automate the heck out of this thing, right? So you can Dockerize it, you can containerize it, right? So even as a developer, instead of having to install FileMaker Server on your machine and cluttering up your operating system, yes, we could do parallels, right? So we can do a Windows VM in Parallels or Fusion. This will become a whole lot easier because now we can wrap this Linux FileMaker Server into a container and use Docker or Kubernetes or any of the other ones to have a FileMaker Server that we can spin up and trash. That's the beauty of having a virtual machine, right? So you can set one up that has all the settings that you want and then copy it, right? So you can play with it, you can fiddle with it. When you're done with it, you trash it, you throw it away, and you just use your templates to create a new one, and away you go, right? So, so we have the on-premise version, the one that we've always known, runs on macOS, runs on Windows, and we have the FileMaker Server one. So those are the ones that you can run by yourself, on-premise, as we call it, right? One quick word on the Windows one. Obviously, the macOS one, we're sort of used to it's only supporting the current version of macOS and the previous one, right? So it's the same applies to FileMaker Server 19. So it's Catalina or Mojave. You can't really install it on anything older than that. The 19 for Windows supports Windows Server 2019 and 2016, right? So if you still have clients that are running Windows Server 2012, then upgrading to FileMaker 19 has a knock-on effect of them having to upgrade their operating system as well. So keep that in mind when you go through these migration things. They will have to go to Server 2016 or Server 2019. Windows Server 2019 has been out for a while, and it's extremely stable. I really have no hesitation. If I have to choose between 16 and 19, I'll go for 19 in a heartbeat. So Windows Server 2019, right? And so when I install a new FileMaker Server 19, I will pick Windows Server 2019 because you'll get the longest shelf life out of that, right? So it'll be there ready for when whatever the next version of FileMaker Server is going to be. You can just install it and keep it running without having to upgrade your operating system. If you're still in 2016, I have no idea how long FileMaker Server will support 2016, but why not go with 2019 if you can? All right. Apart from that, we also have two FileMaker clouds at this point, right? So we have this one, which is the FileMaker Cloud for AWS, and this one is going to go away, right? And I forget the exact timing. It's one of those knowledge base articles, but this one is going to go away at some point. At this point, mine is still at 18. So you'll see this one referred to as FileMaker Cloud 1.0, right? The 2.0 being the other one. It's still up and running. They still patch it. They still update it, but you won't have too much longer if your clients are on this one. Think about where you want to migrate them to, whether you want to migrate them to FileMaker Cloud 2.0 or migrate them to some other cloud hosting service or back on premise. But you'll have to make a decision there at some point. This one is going to go away. Now this one, like I said, runs on Linux, right? Runs on the same CentOS version of Linux as the one that we can install on ourselves. The main difference between this FileMaker Cloud and the FileMaker Cloud 2.0 really comes down to the fact that Cloud 2.0, this one, all right, let me refresh this one. And go back in. With FileMaker Cloud 2.0, as you can see, this one is now 2. And this one is already based on the FileMaker 19 code base, FileMaker Server 19 code base. With 2.0, you don't have access to the operating system, right? So this is a closed environment. Think of it more as an appliance than anything else. This one doesn't run plugins, right? So, it doesn't have a UI to set up server-side schedules, for instance, right? So if you go to any of the other ones, you can set up script schedules, the stuff that we are used to doing that. If you go to cloud, there's no such thing. You can use the admin API to create server-side schedules on FileMaker Cloud. There's just no UI for it. So that's something to consider. So it's a closed environment, right? You can't really extend your FileMaker Server beyond what FileMaker Server brings to the table. So it's sort of limiting in that sense. If you have your FileMaker Server and you want to, say, do something with, I don't know, one of the 360works products, for instance, right? Where there are components that you want to install on your FileMaker Server, or maybe you've spin up your own little microservice that does something, and you want to host it on your FileMaker Server because then it keeps everything in one deployment. You can do that with Cloud 2.0. You can with Cloud 1.0 because they do give you access to the operating system, but you may have to redo it because they may trash the operating system when they upgrade it. So it works. It's not as elegant, if you will, as having your own server. But with 2.0, it's closed. There's no extending it to do that. Now, the FileMaker Cloud 2.0 actually has some features that are not available in some of the other in the on-premise version of FileMaker as we have it. And one of the nicer ones, we haven't seen too much of that being used in the wild, mainly because FileMaker Cloud 2.0 isn't that popular, right? We certainly at Soliant, we don't have many clients on cloud, mainly because we have our own hosting service. So why would we? But there are some features that I wish that Claros would bring to the on-premise version of FileMaker Server, and one of them is the OData, right? OData is a variant of the data API. OData is a specification on how to do RESTful API services, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but this one only exists on FileMaker Cloud, and it's actually a pretty darn great way of using data. It's an industry standard that I wish they would bring to the on-premise version of FileMaker Cloud. The other one, because we have been talking about the extending the OAuth, the identity providers that you can do with FileMaker Server. The FileMaker Cloud version has native support for Okta and for Active Directory federated services. Now, both Okta and Federate ADFS, you can use that with on-premise version of FileMaker Server, and that's also described in those white papers. But the FileMaker Cloud version really makes it simple. It has a really nice UI to set it up, and we don't have that UI yet in the on-premise version of FileMaker Server. Now, let's see. If I log into this one, I should go straight to my FileMaker Cloud here. Now, one of the other differences between cloud and on-premise, and this has somewhat to do with the licensing, right? When you have a FileMaker Cloud subscription like this one, you get two admin consoles, right? You get the FileMaker Server admin console, this is the one that I showed you, and you get this one, which is a customer console. And to give users access to your FileMaker Cloud to basically log into your solution, you have to name them, right? So in the whole of the FileMaker platform, and we know that the licensing sort of goes in the direction of named users. Well, this is one place where the named users really is in effect, right? So this is where it happens. This is where you have to name users, otherwise they cannot open a FileMaker file that you have hosted on your FileMaker Cloud, right? So in the customer console, you have to set up your users, and everybody you set up here as a user can then access a file that you have hosted on FileMaker Cloud, right? So that concept of named users in FileMaker Cloud is very real, right? So there's no anonymous access, if you will, or there's no where you can just set up a FileMaker account in the FileMaker file and then give it to somebody, username and a password, and they will be able to log in. That doesn't happen, right? So native FileMaker accounts, go ahead.
Oh, how do you set up test accounts so you can test your privilege sets without expiring a license?
It's a bit of a, it kind of depends on how many licenses you have, but if you want to set up a test account, first of all of these named users are tied to a Claris ID, right? So, and it's really just an email address, but you have to go and link it to your Claris ID. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it, right? You can have your Claris ID tied to different privilege sets, because when you're testing things inside FileMaker, you're not really testing an account, right? You're testing a privilege set. So you can use the same account and just tie it inside the FileMaker file to different privilege sets, so that you can use that account to test your different ways of what people can do inside your solution. If you do want to set up different accounts, first you have to pick an email address that you haven't used elsewhere, right? And then you can sit in here. You can add it as a named user. Now, the number of users that you set up here, say that this is a 10-user FileMaker Cloud license, right? I can have 100 people in here. That's really not the problem. But I can only have as many as set up as licensed user as I have licenses for, right? So if this is for a client of yours, and that client has a 10-user license, and they actually have 10 users that are using the solution, then you would have to, well, if you need to do some testing, you would have to temporarily bump one of those users off. Let's see if I have one that I can bump off. No, well, actually one of these, right? So I could remove them as a licensed user and assign the license to another user that I have in this list, right? So I don't have to keep adding and removing users, physical users, to this list, but I do have to manage their license state, if you will, if I really want to use different login accounts for the testing. But like I said, keep in mind, the thing that you're testing isn't really the account like we have here, it's the privilege set. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. But an external consultant couldn't bring their own license to this party. They are bound by the license holder's limits.
Correct. 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 Like I said, if you have a client with 10 licensed users and you can't really bump anybody off, then you're kind of stuck, right? For troubleshooting or testing, you would have to bump one of their users into unlicensed state for a bit until you're done. So there is a bit of management involved in that respect for sure. Which is something that Claris is very much aware of, right? This is something that was brought to the table very early on. We'll hope that they come up with some creative solution at some point in the near future. All right, so named users, that's one of the differences that we have between FileMaker Cloud and FileMaker Server. This is the blog post where I describe how to use Active Directory federated services for your on-premise version and for the cloud one. If you're not familiar with ADFS, what ADFS really is that, say that you have your on-premise Active Directory, like many of your clients I'm sure have. There's actually a way to turn that on-premise installation of Active Directory into an OAuth identity provider that you can call from the outside. And that's what ADFS is all about, right? It's a component, it's described at length in the blog post, but you install an additional component on your Active Directory server. Obviously, there's some security with access and ports and all of that stuff. But once you have managed that, now your Active Directory becomes an identity provider, meaning that you can use it with a FileMaker server. Right? And so that's the beauty of it. Typically, when you have an Active Directory and you have a FileMaker server, your FileMaker server's machine has to be joined to the domain before you can use the Active Directory. That's the basic concept of external authentication with Active Directory that we've had since FileMaker 7, right? Now, with ADFS, you can decouple that, right? Your Active Directory can still be used as the identity provider, but your FileMaker server now doesn't have to be joined as a domain server in that Active Directory domain. So that FileMaker server can now live anywhere else, right? It can be an Azure box, it could be an AWS box, a Google Cloud box, but it doesn't have to be physically joined to your domain. FileMaker Server can make authentication calls like through its OAuth mechanism to ADFS and all of that good stuff. Anyway, in that blog post, I have this table here that highlights some of the changes or the differences between your on-premise FileMaker servers and the FileMaker Cloud when it comes to that kind of authentication provider, identity provider that you can use, and you have it in there, right? So when it comes to FileMaker Cloud, those named users, they use their Claris ID, which is similar to like an Apple ID, right? But the Claris ID, underneath that, it uses AWS Cognito, which is an identity provider. So that is the user's identity, right? So that named user, that Claris ID, the combination of the email, the password, and the second factor, because it does support second factor authentication, that is then now the user's identity. So Claris ID is an identity provider. You can have Okta and you can have ADFS when you're on FileMaker Cloud, and that's it, right? You can't really use any of the other ones because it's in a closed environment. And Okta, ADFS, and Claris ID are the only things that Claris has made available through FileMaker Cloud. On the FileMaker server on-premise and self-hosted in the cloud, you really have no limits as long as the identity provider supports OAuth, more specifically OpenID Connect, which is a variant of OAuth, then you're good to go. And we have a great list going here that make all of that happen. All right. Let's go back to my notes. We have about, so what do we have, like 10, 15 minutes left. I did show the FileMaker Cloud customer console, the admin console, end of life, thrift server. We talked about that. Named users. Oh, yes. Let's see. Insomnia. Insomnia, by the way, it's a tool very similar like Postman, except that Insomnia, go away. Oh, why is that? I know, go away. I don't care. Insomnia is like Postman. It's open source and it's free. If you're an individual user, then there's really no difference between Insomnia and Postman. If you have a team of developers, then Insomnia is much cheaper than Postman is. If you're licensing your actually, I don't know where this one comes from, so let's forget about that. What I mentioned a few features that FileMaker Cloud has that are not available in FileMaker Server on-premise and one that you would host yourself. One of them has to do with the admin API. The admin API in FileMaker Cloud has some really nice features. Two of them. One is you can upload a file to the admin API. Can do that with the on-premise version of the admin API. Second, and this is great, you can actually run the data migration tool through an admin API call when you have FileMaker Cloud, right? So when it comes to automating your deployments with the admin API, which is we're getting close to that. Like all of the features that we have in 19, because one of the features we have in 19 is this preview on the patch tool, right? The ability to have a bit of XML, which is a diff file between two versions of your FileMaker solution, and be able to run a command line tool to patch the old version with the changes that you have in the other version. It brings us so much closer to the concept of continuous integration, right? Where you can do your development, spit out what you've just done in your development, feed that to the patch tool or to the admin API and have it applied to your FileMaker server, right? So you can automate all of that because it's all command line driven, it's all standards based, and if we had the data migration and the patch tool as a admin API call, there's really nothing stopping us from automating that whole flow. So that is a feature that we have, and these are the calls that you can make it. Oh, I'll quit doing that. Bye. So just be aware that the FileMaker Cloud has a feature, has a better admin API than the on-premise version of FileMaker Server. Now, it's a little unfortunate because it's not the kind of feature that would make me go to FileMaker Cloud, right? Because the other limitations of FileMaker Cloud are a little too big for my taste, especially the limitation on extensibility, right? There's really no path. whether you need it or not, but you're sort of boxed in. And if you don't know what you'll need 6 months down the road, then it's kind of difficult to get into FileMaker Cloud, because the backing out of it, the undo for FileMaker Cloud is kind of expensive, right? Because you have to prepay for the year. And if you find out 3 months from now that you need a plugin, or that you would want to do something that maybe an identity provider that your client insists that you use that you can't, it's kind of difficult to back out of it without feeling the pinch financially. So it's a great feature that the FileMaker Cloud Admin API has. I just wish that they would bring it to the on-premise version. But the fact that it's there, hopefully, makes it so that we can ask for it. Like we can put some pressure on Claris to say, hey, bring that to the on-premise version so that we can play with that as well. All right, so I talked about continuous integration. Now, I want to highlight this because it's one of these things that is a bit of a limitation, I guess. It's certainly a hurdle when you use FileMaker Cloud. FileMaker Cloud has OData, right, in addition to the data API. Now, if we're talking about using the data API with FileMaker Server Cloud, FileMaker Cloud, you have this notion of your named user. Where did I put it? I put it here, right? So you would think that if you want to use the data API, that it would be as simple as adding this email, which is now the username, and that user's password. When you make the calls to the data API, you have to, let's see, I do have my Postman open somewhere. Right? When you make an authentication call to the data API, you have to provide a username and a password, right? So that's what we have going here, right? When you do that, it'll FileMaker Data API will give you a token. Now, and then you use that token for all the other calls. But the first call is the authentication call, and you have to provide a username and a password. So you would think that, hey, if I use this, because the username is the Claris ID, the email address, if I use this, I set up an account here of which I know the account, the password, then that would work, right? When you make a data API call, well, it doesn't. You actually have to jump through quite a few hurdles there. You have to make a call to AWS Cognito first to get a token from AWS Cognito. Then you have to use that token to make the authentication call to the data API in exchange for the final token. And that final token you can then use for the data API. And there's nothing in the FileMaker code base to do that, right? So there is a knowledge base article that will explain how you do it, and it will give you some links to some JavaScript code that you can download and make that first call to AWS Cognito. Remember, I said that this whole Claris ID thing uses AWS Cognito as the identity provider, as the directory service, if you will. This won't surprise you, but I have a blog post that explains this and has a link to this. What we're looking at here on the screen is a very simple Node.js web service that has an endpoint, and you can call the endpoint with your username and password, meaning the Claris ID username and password, and it'll give you back a token. Then you can use that token for your data API calls, and away you go. But so I don't expect you to read this and go, oh yes, I see what Wim is doing there. I'm just showing you this as an example of the hoops you have to jump through to make that happen. It's a little unfortunate, and it sort of speaks to the same kind of problem that we just had the question about. As a developer, when I need to do some troubleshooting or I want some test accounts, and how does this work with named users? It's the same kind of deal, because the data API, more often than not, is going to be used in some system-to-system kind of integration, right? It's typically not going to be a user making a data API call. It's going to be some system pushing some data or asking for some data from FileMaker Server. But you have to set it up as a named user here, which really doesn't, well, I guess you could say it does make sense because it's a licensed user using some FileMaker data, but it sort of feels wrong that you have to make or use an email address, link it to a Claris ID, just so that you can then use that set of credentials to make that kind of calls to Cognito and get a token from the data API. and do all of that stuff. So it feels a little awkward. It's probably a good term to put it. It's one of these other things that we're talking to Claris about, to say, hey, that's clearly something that you haven't thought all the way through. One of the ideas that we're sort of pushing on Claris is the fact that, and a lot of APIs do that, by the way, right? Where you can say, hey, I have my FileMaker Cloud. Let me generate a token that I can use for this kind of system-to-system kind of integration, right? And I can revoke the token. I can set an expiry on the token so that it expires after 6 months, after a month, after a year, whatever it may be. But at least that I can have a token that I can give to somebody else to say, hey, use this token, and the token is then associated with a privilege set on the FileMaker side, so it can only do what it needs to do, so that we don't have to use one of these named users for things like system integrations, right? The same applies, by the way, and I'll have a Claris Engage session on that as part of the on-demand sessions that you can see listed. Well, I guess the heading is there, but the sessions are listed there on using webhooks. Webhooks really are nothing more than one system. An event happens in some other system, right? It could be, say, SAP's Ariba, where people enter purchase orders, and the purchase orders have to be pushed to your FileMaker system, right? So when the user in SAP is done with the purchase order, they hit a button. The Ariba can be configured with a URL that the XML representation of that purchase order will then be sent to that URL. So you'd think, well, hey, that's perfect. I can use the data API for that, right? I can create one of those URLs here that we have to create a record. All right, create a record, right? So this would be the URL to create a record. I can give that URL to SAP, and voila, I'll have my record created. It doesn't quite work that way, right? One, because the data API requires prior authentication, right? And webhooks really are just one URL. They will not be able to make a two-step call, one to the data API to get an authentication and a token, and then use that token to actually send the XML over. The second one is the data API is a RESTful JSON web service. So if SAP sits here trying to push XML into FileMaker, it's not going to work this way, right? So these are some of the other things that we're talking to Claris about, and on how to fix it. Claris Connect, by the way, is one way to fix that, right? Where you can set up a receiving URL on Claris Connect, so that when it receives it, it can transform whatever it receives and then push it into FileMaker Server through that fashion. So you'll have to come to my Engage session to learn more about that stuff. But those are some of the things that you cannot do depending on the flavor of FileMaker Server that you have. All right, I'll open up the chat here for a bit and see if I have anything that I missed. While I'm reading the chat here and try to pick up some questions, feel free to shout them out. If you have something that you want me to cover in the next, what shall we say, 10 minutes or so.
Great job so far, Wim. Thank you. Quick question. You know, from an anecdotal standpoint, I know it's probably a bit difficult. You were talking about the impact moving to Linux performance-wise. Any sort of metrics? Hey, you know, saturation, disks. I mean, disks are going to be disks and so forth, but in terms of just efficiency of the OS, efficiency of the RAM usage and so forth. But any other limitations or restrictions you see being lifted?
With the Linux version, it's going to be largely the efficiency of both the memory and the processing power, right? You're right, because the disk I/O is going to be the disk I/O. So the faster you can make it, the better it's going to be performing. But it's really going to be in the efficiency of the use of the processing power and the memory. Memory is these days is very much a non-factor because it's cheap, especially in a virtualized world, to bump up from 8 gigs to 16 gigs to 32 gigs. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to do that. Getting more processing power is, and the Linux version clearly is very much more performant than its predecessors. Actually, I was just in the process of uploading this set of files here to my Linux version. This is something that I used in ETS for 18. It's called Punisher. I'm not sure if I can actually open it locally. Probably not easily. Well, I won't waste your time. What the Punisher does, it basically spins up. You get to decide how many sessions, but it spins up as many concurrent perform script on service sessions that all do the same thing, and it has a whole slew of, I think, something like 16 scripts that it runs through that all do very different things, like iterate through big sets of data, importing, exporting, so different things that tax the processors in different fashion. So I believe this version, the current version of the preview that we have, is the first one that can do PSOS. So we couldn't do it before. It's still a little early days, but we're getting closer to having some real metrics about the actual one-to-one comparison of the Linux version against using the same AWS, say T3 large, right? So it's going to be an on-par machine-to-machine, spec-to-spec comparison of the FileMaker server. So we're getting there. We're getting close.
Nice, thanks.
There's a question in the chat here whether the Linux version can support external authentication. It's not working, but yes. Right. So if you go, you'll have the same settings. So it's the same mechanism. In the preview version, this particular thing isn't working yet, so we haven't been able to test, but it should be working in by the time that they release this.
And would that be using Open Directory on Linux? When you were talking about AD federated services, that sounded pretty promising if there's already the AD infrastructure. But let's say it's just a fresh install with its own architecture. What sort of directory service would you be using on Linux to enable that external auth?
It's a good question. I'm actually firing this up very quickly. This is never mind this. Never mind the man behind the curtain. This is my own Keycloak, and then the main reason I want to show it to you quickly is just for one thing. It's getting there. There we go. All right. All right. Keycloak is an identity provider, and it's open source, so it's free. You host it yourself, or you subscribe to one of the somebody who hosts it for you. The main thing that I want to show you, and this is going to be in the next version of the white papers, you get to pick from. This is where the federation and the delegation comes into play, right? So FileMaker talks to Keycloak. That's all there is to it, and that's easy to set up. But then Keycloak can hand off the authentication to anything else. So you can use any of these presets providers. But when it comes to, say, Open Directory, right? So if you have a client with an Open Directory, you can just do the federation to LDAP, right? Because Open Directory is an Open LDAP server, so it'll understand the LDAP syntax that you throw at it. So this is how you would use that. So you put something in the middle, because FileMaker Server natively, unless it runs on macOS, is not going to be able to authenticate against Open Directory directly, but indirectly, it's going to be working just fine. And this is not a, I want to stress that, this is not like a funky workaround that isn't safe or secure, right? This is as safe and secure as you can make it, because these are all industry standards, and the authentication happens in the most secure fashion. It's actually a multi-step process that will happen under the hood that is going to be totally invisible to your users. But this is how you would do it. This is actually how you can make your FileMaker server authenticate against an Open Directory, because you just delegate it to something like Keycloak or Okta, for that matter. They all provide this kind of LDAP integration for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. We have a question there. What OS does Keycloak? I have this Keycloak that I have running here is also on CentOS, and this is actually a T2 Micro on AWS, so it costs me nothing to run, well, I don't know how much it costs me, but like $10, $15 a month. And since Keycloak is free, I have it running. The reason I have to start it up because I don't have it running all the time. I just use it when I need it. So this runs on Linux. You can run it on Mac, I believe, too, Keycloak, or you can just get a container, right? So it's Docker, Kubernetes, anything you want. It's you can run it at will anywhere you want.
Have you been following the thread in the community about the people who've been getting the Linux server up and running? And I think in that thread they talked about some other Linux builds other than CentOS. CentOS seems like an interesting choice. Do you have any opinion or any experience with other Linux builds than CentOS? Or in terms of FileMaker Server, I mean?
No, not when it comes to FileMaker Server. I'm a belts and suspenders guy, right? So it's clear to me that the officially supported and blessed Linux distro is going to be CentOS, and for good reason, right? CentOS is the open source version of Red Hat Linux. Red Hat Linux being the #1 enterprise used Linux version. So it makes total sense to use CentOS. It's going to be the most secure Linux distro that you can find. It has tremendous development pace when it comes to these security patches and all of that stuff. So you really can't go wrong with using CentOS. Will it run on any other ones? Absolutely. It's going to be a given that I'll have this up and running on one of my Raspberry Pis before the day is over. So yeah, for client stuff, I'll just stick with CentOS. It's easy. There's really no good reason not to use it, unless as an enterprise or as an organization, there's a technology stack that doesn't include CentOS or prohibits CentOS, or for whatever reason they want to use something else. It's going to work just fine because there's really nothing too specific about FileMaker. Actually, one of the nice things that you can do, and I'll see if I can find this quickly. Here's my penguin. One of the things you can ask is that once FileMaker Server is installed, you can ask for all the dependencies. So these are all the packages that FileMaker Server installs for you, right? So clearly, if you're into Linux and these kinds of things, you can vet these and say, hey, yeah, I can see that one would be difficult, or that one would be difficult if I use Debian or any of the other ones. So you can certainly vet the FileMaker Server install ahead of time and see whether it will perform just fine on your chosen version of Linux. All right, we got a few more minutes. There's a question in the chat there that I mentioned that plugins don't work on FileMaker Cloud, right? And that's not a technical limitation because plugins do work on the Linux version. So we're looking at the Linux version right here. And it's open to get the plugins installed, provided that you have the right version of the plugin. The reason that FileMaker Cloud doesn't like plugins is because plugins are an unknown quantity for the closed environment that they have. And remember, when I install FileMaker Server for Linux on my AWS, I get dinged if this is a runaway process that starts churning up processing power and disk I/O and all of that stuff. I'll be the one paying up for that. If this happens on the FileMaker Cloud stuff, it happens in Claris's AWS account, and they are liable for paying whatever you do. If I make a plugin for Bitcoin mining, right, so I can melt their data center. That's the main reason that they don't want plugins in their closed environments, right? So it's not technical limitation. It's one of prudence, if you will, that they don't want that stuff happening in their account. Question, does Linux have a server documents folder or temporary path? It does, same as the other ones. So no difference there. Question about fonts. Yeah, the Linux version obviously has support for fonts, right? So you can install your own fonts if you would. How that will be used by FileMaker Server, I don't know. That would remain to be tested. All right, David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Wim. Great job, as always. That was excellent. Gosh, what you have meetings where you get a couple of some tips and tricks and some little stuff. And again, we have just absolutely a wealth of riches today. When you talk about FileMaker Server, when do you not mention Wim Decorte in the conversation, basically? And obviously, our next speaker, again, highly noted, super smart, brings creativity and thought to a lot of the things that he shows us. We're super thrilled to have Cris Ippolite up next, and he's going to be taking us on a tour of some of the things, kind of things that Todd, I think, kind of skated through a little bit last time, but also some things that are brand new that we really didn't get to dive into, and I think Cris has given a lot of thought to it. So let's give him our attention, and thanks, Cris.
Thanks, Dave, and everyone. Dave, you didn't get my note about lowering expectations after the win.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just going to watch the participants massively drop like Wisconsin weather from hour to hour. But delighted to be here. Humbled to be here. I've been doing some user groups, and I think the count for FMDiSC, not to be surprised, is higher than all the other groups I've done combined. So it's really cool to be able to be here and talk to you guys about this. And I'm glad a little bit of grass has grown between the deploy and release of this stuff until now, because it's given me a chance to mess around with some of these things. So the perspective I'm going to give you guys and by the way, just want to check you guys are seeing my screen, audio is coming in okay? Yep, cool. All right, so the perspective I'm going to give you here, even though I'm starting off with one of the demo kit slides here, is I just want to show you like some of the new features, talk about them, explain them. I want to have a discussion with you guys. So if you feel compelled to ask a question, just pop in and ask the question. I like that kind of dialogue. I don't want this to get, too lectury or anything like that. But the tone of what I'm going to share with you guys today is just some stuff I've been messing around with in the lab, stuff I found that works, and maybe some cool things, and really just to kind of get you thinking about it a little bit. And the three topics that I'm going to cover in the next hour or so, and then leave some time. Well, we'll leave some time for Q&A, but that doesn't mean you have to wait till the end. I encourage the dialogue as we go. Are going to be, as you see on screen, machine learning. I'm going to focus on the new CoreML support. I do want to talk a little bit about just machine learning in general outside of CoreML support. And in addition to that, I'm going to show you NFC support on iOS devices, and then shortcuts. Somewhat commonly referred to as Siri shortcuts, but they're really it's just an app called Shortcuts. And I'm going to show you how Siri integrates into that and potentially how we can make use of it and even share these shortcuts. So a bunch of stuff I've been working on, so I'm delighted to be here. And without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the machine learning portion of it. First of all, machine learning integration with FileMaker is not new in FileMaker 19. Machine learning models have not been able to be natively integrated into FileMaker outside of API integrations. And there's a lot of models. I'm going to show you an example of one before I'm done with this part of the discussion that is actually API based. So the models are hosted somewhere and using all of FileMaker's native API integration tools that we have, not the least of which are the native JSON parsing to bring data in. We can then actually natively integrate these models into FileMaker. I'm also delighted to share a story. This is probably not usually the audience that I would share sports related things with. That is not pejorative by any means. I just try to keep that stuff to myself and not confuse people. But I just got some crazy news while Wim was talking that is related to FileMaker and machine learning. It's just silly trivia. But before I jump into the silliness, let's talk about what actually is new in 19 for starters. So specifically in 19, we have support for CoreML. Now, what that means is actually we can create machine learning models. I'm going to show you the steps for creating your own machine learning model, and I've done a few demos before. I've got some up on YouTube. I'm not going to rehash those same ones. I have a fun one for you guys today. I hope you guys are in a fun mood. I'm gonna walk you through the steps of creating what's called a vision model. This is one of the models that is, you know, somewhat ubiquitous in apps all over the place, but basically allow you to take your phone, take a picture of something, and you have trained a model to identify something or not. And I've got a fun use case for that and a file I can share with you and all sorts of that kind of stuff. So how does something like that work? Specifically, the support for CoreML, meaning when I drop a previously created model into a container field in FileMaker, what kind of support do I have? Well, first of all, we need to be able to run a model. And that is the support for the configure machine learning model script step. The configure machine learning model script step is really just one of those kind of on-off switch script steps, not too unlike, well, you'll see actually when I talk about configure NFC, it was the same with when you want to turn on geofencing or polling for iBeacons. It's just sort of a, within my user session, turn on the fact that I'm looking for, you know, I'm looking for a model. Then when the model is turned on, so to speak, or available to the app in the session, then we want to be able to have access to it within the calculation engine. And that's where the support for the compute model function, calculation function comes into play. And compute model allows us to reference our model, and then we get back some JSON. So this is where, you know, we got the native JSON parsing support, you know, back a few versions ago. And this is one of the areas where we can actually use to parse out data. What you're looking at on the bottom of my screen, and apologies for those of you that have to squint, is what gets returned in this example. This would be a 3 classification model. And you notice that it's got 3 rows in the JSON data. And this model, this is actually a model that I have as well. I trained a model to recognize these 3 parts in another demo that I was working on. So what FileMaker does is it gives you back, it says, hey, you've shown me this photo, in the case of a vision model, that is. You've shown me a photo. I think it's headlight socket Dorman part, and I'm 99% confident that it is. Now, it could be the fuel filter micro one, that's the row below it, and I'm about 4% or maybe 4% confident that, no, 0.4% confident that that's the case. So you get the idea is you're always going to get back this data from compute model. It's going to list what it thinks it is with its level of confidence. So we got classifications and confidence. These are the terminology that we want to get familiar with. And it'll list everything. And basically the one that we care most about is one that's on top. And that's the one that it thinks is the most likely match. So, I'm going to get back to, so there's really support. I should actually go in a little bit further and tell you that there's support for really 2 types of models. There's a vision model and there's a general model. The vision model is the one that I'm going to show you in this demonstration. And before I show you the demonstration, again, I hope you guys are in the mood, you know, for a little bit of silliness, but also just to make this super easy and approachable for you. I put this YouTube video out here. And this is based, for those of you, I just want to preface this by saying I have nothing against hot dogs or for hot dogs. I am completely in the middle, right down the middle on hot dogs, completely. But what I did is created a machine learning model that recognizes whether something you took a picture of is a hot dog or is not a hot dog. And this is not an original thought. This is, of course, something that is a derivative from a punchline that was on Silicon Valley, a show on HBO. If you guys want some context, you can go watch season 4, episode 4 to understand what the whole hot dog, not hot dog thing. But the non-silly part of it is we've trained a model with a bunch of photos of hot dogs and then a bunch of photos of not hot dogs. And what we're doing is asking it, when we feed it new photos in the future, to tell us which one of those 2 things it is. So in my case, I only have 2 classifications, either hot dog or not hot dog. Whereas if I had a parts database of like 1,000 parts and I wanted to train a model to be trained on 1,000 of those parts, I would have 1,000 classifications. So this one's super simple. The reason I'm besides just having some fun with it, I also want to point out that if you go to the YouTube link that I just posted in the group chat, you'll see that there's a link in here to download this actual file. So I urge you to do it. You can download the file. It's got the model embedded right in it. You can load it onto your phone as is, and you can take pictures, if things open back up again, and you can have a little barbecue, you can try it out with your own hot dogs or not hot dogs. But really just to kind of see how the scripting works and the calculation functions and some of the stuff I'm going to speed through in this demonstration part of it. So, so and again, I beg you to not. I apologize for the levity that I'm bringing to this. This is a very serious topic, but this is the most simple version, and I've never shown this to any user groups or any groups at all. This is the simplest version of creating a vision machine learning model, and I want to actually share that with you guys. So I'm going to go real quick, just another tech check here. You guys still able to see my screen now that I'm in full screen? I only ask because I've had some problems. Okay, thanks, Wim. So what I'm going to do is take you through how you actually set up one of these vision models. And again, there's vision in general. I'll talk to you guys about general in just a moment. And by the way, I'm not the only person who's done this exact same demo before. I want to acknowledge the others who've come before me here, but this one I'm going to share with you guys. So what I did is I created a FileMaker file, but before I did that, I have these two folders. I have this folder that's called test, and I have this folder that's called train. And that's because when we're creating a model, we need to be able to, we have to train the model. Most of the time it's with data that pertains to general, but vision, which I think is a little bit easier to wrap our heads around, vision means that we have to train it with images. So I want to feed it images of the different classifications so that it can learn what it, what it's looking at it and know it when it sees it in the future. So you create a train folder, and what I did there was, honestly, I went and found, some source online that I referenced in that YouTube video that had a whole ton of pictures of hot dogs. And it also had pictures of things that weren't hot dogs. And by the way, I keep apologizing for this, but it's a bad model because I say that it's a bad model because generally you're trying to find out if something is one of your classifications, not if it's one classification that another classification is that it's just not the first thing. That's just utter silliness. Usually it's specifically, here's 10 things I want you to recognize. Tell me which one you think it is. So bear with me there. This is where I found the hot dog sources. I downloaded a bunch of images, and basically what I've done in the various different models that I've created, I found that if I take pictures of a thing, like for example, I did another model that's on YouTube somewhere where I had a little collection from when I was a kid of these little toy helmets that I had from when I was a kid. I actually went, and there's 32 of them, one for each football team, and I created a model for those. So in that case, I took pictures of all 32 helmets and therefore created a 32 classification model. And I just take pictures from different areas so that, depending on when your users are using your app, if they're taking pictures of something from a certain angle, you want to make sure that that's captured in the accuracy of the model. I would take about, yeah, go ahead.
Does it slow it down if you have more test examples?
Does it slow the performance down?
Yes.
It's a great question. I've done, the highest model is 100, and interestingly enough, I don't see the actual processing of the model take any more or less time. There is a bit of, sometimes there's a bit of a lag in the actual evaluation of the image that you're sending to the model, but I haven't gone into the thousands yet, so my expectation would be that there'd be some level of processing. But the thing is, that's all that logic is built into the model already. So so the building of the model definitely takes longer with more images, but I don't believe the processing has as much of an impact as the building process does. But thank you for that question, Ken. And that last helmet was for you too, by the way.
I like that one.
And so I take, let's say I take 50 pictures of a object. I'll take 30 of them and put them into a test folder, and I'll take 30 of them and put them into a train folder, and the other 20 I'll put into a test. And you'll notice, and again, sorry for the high resolution here, but the folder that I created, the folder that's called test, it's the same as the one that's called train. I have subfolders in there. So the way you do it for vision models is you actually create subfolders for every classification. And the name that you give the subfolders is what the model is going to adopt as the name that it's going to identify. So you saw in the parts one before where it was a part name and then an ID after it. I intentionally named my subfolders the part number and with a space and an ID because throughout the workflow of the app, that way I could parse out the ID when I needed it in the classification, or the name if I needed it, that type of thing. In this case, in the interest of utter silliness, I was curious to see if I named a classification the hot dog emoji, whether or not the model would work. And we'll find out in a second if that was true. And then the other one I named not hot dog. So once you have all your folders in place, then what you do for the, now here's the big caveat, and this is why I don't want to just touch on CoreML stuff here today. I'll spend a few minutes on other stuff, but CoreML is an Apple technology. So therefore, if you want to integrate CoreML support into your applications, your users have to be running on macOS. Your users have to be running on Mac's iOS platform, which opens up a lot of possibilities, no question on iOS. And to some degree, although this is not my forte, if you happen to be running a server that's run on macOS, which I don't know if anybody really does that anymore, but then you can run your model on the server side that way, right? So my apologies to Windows users, but I promise you, I'm going to show you ways that you can use API hosted models within your workflows, and it'll be even more powerful than even what I'm showing you here today. So what I found for creating models, now another caveat here is that FileMaker does not allow us to create models. It currently doesn't allow us to update models on the fly, so to speak, which isn't super common in the machine learning world. You know, models would need to be updated for accuracy purposes, and models would need to be updated, like, for example, if I add another product to my inventory, I'd have to go update the whole model. So having a tool that makes it easy to create and update your models is a key part of the adoption of this technology. And there are ways you can connect to other, like, you know, API-driven sources that will let you rerun the model. So I would have to say, if I squint really hard and I look in the future, if the adoption of machine learning in the FileMaker platform remains, we'll probably see the ability to do things like write and update our models. So right now, what I did is there's a for those of you that have access to Xcode, which runs on Mac, and specifically Mac 10.15 and higher, if you open up Xcode, you'll open up the Open Developer Tool section, and you'll notice that there's an app in there called Create ML. And this is an amazing tool, makes it really easy to create your own model. Now I'm running Create ML on my screen right now, and I'm going to open up this template chooser. And what we're doing is a vision model or an image classifier specifically. And I'm going to choose that as my template and just name the project. And up on screen pops Create ML's vision or image classifier model for us to be able to create this. Now, I'm going to save it to my desktop so you can see what it looks like. It's just a little, Xcode file. And really all that it's asking for here is training data and testing data. And that's why I wanted to share with all of you, how you set that up. So all I have to do is just select the files. I go in and do my train folder, and that includes all the subfolders. It sees that it has 498 total items. Which is a lot more than it needed. It identifies two different classes, again, hot dog and not hot dog. And then it'll ask me for training or testing data, I'm sorry. And so I just point to the other folder. These aren't the same images, by the way. This is a different group of images to sort of really test the accuracy. And that's all you have to do. Now, at this point, what you do is you just go up to the play button there that says train and let it do its thing. Now, to Ken's point, I edited this part of the video that I'm sharing with you guys. This is the one that's up on YouTube, because that does take a few minutes. But I'm sorry, this one took only 13 seconds. So probably because I just have the two classifications. In the past, though, it takes a bit of time. So you'll notice here that I've got 99% precision. So I personally have a lot of confidence in this model to be able to identify a hot dog or not based on the precision. The testing case. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I think you grabbed the wrong, Chris, on the previous screen. I think you assigned the wrong folder to the test.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So no wonder it was 99%. It should have been 100% then. What the heck's going on there? So let's focus on the precision of the train in the first place. So testing shockingly comes in at 99%, even though it's the exact same images. So in generally, what this will help you do, like what I've done in the past is also, when I get past the testing and training, it'll list all the classifications and the precision, and I'll maybe find one in there, like all the rest of them might be in the 90s or high 80s or something. And then I'll see one that is like 67. So if I really want an accurate model, I'll go and maybe re-photograph those images and run the model again and see if I can get that accuracy up. So that's really what these metrics are all about here for us. So the next step from here, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little output. That is actually a machine learning model. The thing to pay the most attention to is that it's only 17K in size. So the burden of embedding this into your file and making your file less portable as a result is really not a thing. But the model is the thing that's actually compatible with FileMaker. So I'm going to show you, this is the file. For those of you that have downloaded it while I was talking or that will download it later and play around with it, you'll see that there's a layout called CoreML test. And while this isn't required, this has become sort of a best practice for those that are integrating at least vision models into your FileMaker application, a nice layout for you to be able to test these things out. And so to explain what we're looking at, on the very far left-hand side, I've got the container that's going to store the model. Below it is a button that's going to run a script. I'm going to show you that script in a second. In the middle is a container where I'm going to drag in a couple test images to make sure it's working. And on the right are the results of those. I have two results I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you the actual results of the compute model function. And then on the top, I'm going to show you a little pro tip that lets you just pull the one that's the one that probably has the highest confidence. So let's try this out. So first, all we got to do is we take the image classifier, drop it right in there. By the way, the file that I'm sharing with you guys already has the model in that container. And then at this point, so I think this is an important part. Even though you have a model stored in a container field somewhere in your application, you have to load the model. Just because it's in your database, in your app, sorry, it doesn't mean that that it's loaded. And that's actually good, because then you can actually only turn it on and off when you're actually going to evaluate something. So I found that in some use cases, I can just turn it on at the beginning of my session, and in others, I just turn it on and then off again using the new script step as I need it, right? So so you don't have to have that running, kind of speaking to the question at the top of this discussion about, overhead or mitigating that overhead. So if you look at this, and again, sorry for the resolution on this over Zoom and everything, guys, but if you want to download the file, you'll be able to play around with this. But I have two different, calculations here. One of them is just the compute model function. Let me see, I opened that one up here so we can take a little bit closer look. This one is the one that's going to show the classification. You see what I've done is I've taken compute model, and you see that I have a couple things that I have to feed into compute model. First of all is the name of the model. That, and I'm going to show you in a second, the script step. When you load a model, you have to name the model that you're loading. And that just, it really doesn't mean the file name or whatever, I don't have to name it hot dog, not hot dog or anything. You just name it something that later then the compute model functions can actually pick it up. That gives you the flexibility to have calculation functions that are specifically just evaluating certain models, and be able to manage which models are affected by both calculations and the scripts within your session. The other thing I did is wrap it in a JSON get element, and then at the end of it I use if you see that in brackets I've got the zero index dot classification. That's basically telling me take the top classification. That's what that one's all about. Curiously, I found another thing that works too, which is the same thing, but instead of there's some undocumented, surprisingly undocumented input variables here within compute model. Specifically, you'll notice here, so, on the top one, I say compute model, I name it seafood, I say it's an image model, and then I tell it to go find the model in the test image container field. And then I'm using the JSON get element to actually pull the top one. In the second one, you'll notice I added one more. I named it seafood, it's an image model, it's this is the container where it lives. And then I added this one other thing called confidence lower limit 1, which means I don't have to show in the return JSON all of the ones it matches. I can just tell it, give me the ones that are lower than a 1. Now they're all lower than a 1. They're between 0 and 1. So I could have said, like, give me the lower limit is 0.8, meaning give me anything that you think is an 80% confidence and higher, or 95% confidence and higher, to kind of mitigate the list on the payload you're getting back. But the other one is the return at least 1. Basically, no matter what your lower limit is, if you return at least 1, that little trick and tip there I found will always give you the top classification. It's basically going to give you the one that your model thinks it is. So either one of those two are nice and clean ways to actually pull that top one, play around with it at your leisure. And again, you can download that file over on the YouTube page. The second part of it is that And that's just and the other one is showing you the actual confidence that's returned. Now let's take a look at the script. Not much to see for those that you know, have trouble like me reading small fonts. All this is it's a single step script. It's the configure machine learning model script. And you'll notice I'm naming it seafood. So that's where the reference to it came, the reference to the model came from in my compute model. And then I'm saying, well, where is the image that I'm going to evaluate in this vision model? And I'm saying it's in that particular container field. So really it's turn on, load the model, turn it on by loading it, I should say. And then you have your compute model functions actually extract that. Any questions so far on any of these steps?
No, it looks great.
Cool. And feel free to pipe in. And thank you guys for noticing the wrong testing. It gives me assurances to know people are watching. Thank you so much. It's very sweet of you. So let's try this out. Let's test this bad boy out.
Chris, a quick question.
Yeah.
To load those models, if you're doing, let's say you're doing your auto parts, do you need to load like all of the potential auto part models in order to evaluate an image?
Well, I'm going to focus on the plural, the choice of the plural that you use there. If I have 1,000 auto parts, I can create one singular model to evaluate all 1,000 of those parts. So all I do is take that model and then drag it in here.
Gotcha.
And I'm taking responsibility for having created confusion that I really have one thing here in this model. I get that. But the idea is it's just like whatever group of things become your one model, right? And hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense when I show you the examples of the other things here in a second. So let me accelerate through this. So basically I'm going to take an image, I'm going to drop it in there, and let's take a look at what we get. This is a hot dog, or not a hot dog. And it comes back and it says not a hot dog. You can see that it identified the name of the classification because of the emojis I chose. And it says that it really had a confidence of 1. Now, don't be confused by, if you look at the second confidence, it appears as though it says it's a confidence of 1.5. But if you go all the way over to the right, you see that's actually an exponential of 8, which means it's a confidence of 0.000000015. So it really isn't very confident at all. You'll see that, and that kind of threw me off for a couple hours on a Saturday, and I don't want you guys to have the same experience. Okay, so what does this mean? Okay, then we tested a couple times. There's some actual hot dogs. So for those of you that want to use this app, this is how it'll work. Download it, and if you want to try it on your own iPhone, you need to get FileMaker Go for 19. There's also a link for that in the description. And then when you open it up, you get to this screen. You'll see that there's instructions. All you got to do is tap the hot dog icon to try it out. And then you can just tap 2 fingers anywhere on the screen besides the hot dog to exit the application. And once you see the results that you'll see here in a second, you just tap them to return home and try again. So that's how you actually use this. Tap the hot dog. And let's try the hot dog option.
That audio is not coming through very well.
Oh, is it? It's not? Great, that worked. So let's try something that's not a hot dog.
Not hot dog.
And you see that it gives us positive results. Now your results may vary, but most importantly, I hope you have some fun with this. Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, that makes sense on the audio. So so pleased to enjoy different models. On that same YouTube account, there's other ones that are probably a little bit more business relevant with the parts inventory I was talking about, and even the one with that helmet inventory that I've shown. And yeah, Vivian, good point. That poor dog is probably a little warm. It is a little toasty here in Orange County today. So good call on that one. And let me show you a little something else about machine learning though. And first of all, let me share some personal news I received while Wim was talking here as it pertains to machine learning. I haven't really used vision models in FileMaker before until working in the lab here with the FileMaker 19 stuff. But I have been a longtime user of general or like more text-based models inside FileMaker. As a matter of fact, I am going to reveal some personal information to those of you here, those of you still remaining that are listening to this. I have an alter ego. And that alter ego is #sports. it all comes from having experimented with machine learning in order to, for the purpose of cheating against my friends in sports prognostication. Now, before Ronnie mentions that he beat me in fantasy football twice last year,
How many times?
2 times, and then you got crushed in the playoffs mercilessly. So
Shame on you.
if you want me to go into the details, yeah, I got to keep everybody interested. But just today, while Wim was talking, I also basically what I did was I created a machine learning model. It's a supervised unstructured machine learning model that evaluates like 15 seasons worth of player performance and against a bunch of different factors. That's really how models generally work. You just pick a bunch of data, tons of data. Now, I know there's schools of thought out there that say you don't need large data. For me, personally, my opinion is the more data, the better, because I've just seen accuracy. Every spring and summer for the last 10 years, I've evaluated sports data, thrown more variables at it to see if it changes the accuracy of my model, and thrown away the ones that don't, and then keep the ones that do. And I found that the more data I have, the more accurate I get. And essentially what I'm trying to do is predict what players are going to do on a given Sunday in the National Football League. So I created this thing. I'm not going to do a shameless plug and tell you what my persona is, but ended up, I was like in these accuracy contests many years ago. I ended up getting a job at Sirius Radio. I was a host of a 1-hour-long Sirius Radio show on their fantasy sports channel for 2 years. Then I got hired by the NFL. I was working for the NFL for 3 seasons until finally I realized that I have this job to do with, in the same world as you guys, and I should probably keep, focus on things a little bit. So I stopped doing that, but on the side, I keep doing this silly website. And just while Wim's talking, I found out that the FileMaker-based machine learning model was just added as the top 10 most accurate experts of 2019 out of 160 of these that they track, actual people who do that for a living. So I would like to say yay FileMaker and yay machine learning, right? So that's really what that story is about. Thank you for all the muted clapping. I appreciate it. And I hope you guys still take me seriously after this. Not as if you did before. But this is one of the demo kit ones that Ronnie Rios had put together. I've had a lot of fun watching Ronnie Rios's models, but here's some other models. There's models out there that predict the age based on a photo. And I don't know, when I put my picture in there, it seems to not be accurate. But this landscaping one I'm going to show you in a second. House pricing. There's stuff like sentiment detection. I'm going to show you one that takes large transcripts and summarizes them and pulls out keywords. But these are just examples of other non-visual, well, a couple of those were vision models. These are a couple examples of things that you might find interesting. So let me go back into FileMaker and show you 2 quickies before I jump into the other topics, because I don't want to waste your time here this morning. So this demo is one that Ronnie put together, and for those of you that have done the landscaping demos, you're probably all too familiar with the Bryant Research Park and the infamous Doris Rojas. But what this one is actually doing is it has a series of work orders, and just to kind of speak to the data sets, yeah, you don't have to have thousands of data records to be able to manage, but you do have to have data in order to create your, if we switch out of the vision model discussion, you have to have images in order for your model to be able to recognize images in the future. I have to have data in order for my model to be able to evaluate data in the future. For example, internally at iSolutions, we've been discussing doing something in our internal project management system that is akin to a risk rating on projects. And while we've got a model set up and parameters in mind, we need to go collect data. So what we discovered was, well, we have to go put this field in there and this field and this field. And we need to start tracking it for at least, a few months, 6 months or so that we can actually take that real data and create a model. So the point there is that here's a bunch of work orders that Ronnie has associated with the Bryant Research Park, previous jobs that they've done there. And what he's done is created a model that takes into account various parameters. Each of these parameters have to match parameters that are being collected by the app. Okay, so when they're doing a bid, they come in with property size, they have a field for amount of trees, the number of employees that are going to be on the job, and even the town that the job is in and whether or not they're going to use certain products. So then you can create a model that goes and looks at all those old ones and says, well, based on these parameters, you're probably, now you'll notice that it says I have to load the model. That means I had not loaded it yet in my session. So I load the model, and down here in the bottom, you see 860 hours. So this has taken old bids and made it so that it can predict new bids moving forward. The other one here is a very common one. It's called sentiment analysis. And this is just, it just reads reviews and determines based on the model whether or not this was a positive or negative review. You know, like this one, if I do a smiley face instead and I load the model, and it, by the way, that pop-up doesn't happen every time. It just happens at the beginning of it. As a matter of fact, if I do sad face, you'll notice that it doesn't bother me to pop and load the model up again, but it does actually determine that that sentiment was negative. Last thing on machine learning, and then we're gonna switch around. My wife is a teacher, and I'm sure many of you have educators in the family, or at the very least students in the family. And you know, the big topic has been distance learning. And so I was playing around with like different ways that, you know, we could create distance learning stories within the Claris platform. And I had played with a couple of models, and and if you guys are, you know, first of all, the vision model stuff, you can really, it's really easy for you to kind of get familiar with it. But this other one, which I was turned on to by Heidi Porter, all credit to Heidi. She did a presentation at DevCon a couple years ago on this monkey learn source. So just like Create ML can help you create your own models, this monkey learn platform can help you create models as well too. So I can create a classifier or an extractor. So I have extractor models, and here I'm feeding it data. What you don't see here is FileMaker or Claris Connect. But if I was a gambling man, I guess that maybe one of those two things might show up on Monkey Learn as a data source one way or another. So if that was the case, we could create our own models like the ones I was describing to you earlier. And in this case, what the model does is it actually takes a Zoom ID. So the idea is, you know, my wife has had to turn into a video recording person and have to record lessons or classes on Zoom, which is what her school uses, and then have to post them somewhere so that these kids can get notified. You know, the kids that weren't there could get notified, and in the notification they want a summary of what was discussed, and they need these keywords. Keywords are a key part of every lesson for educators. So instead of her having to go record the Zoom and then go put a transcription in there and then summarize it and put the keywords, I decided I would use a monkey learn, two different models, an extractor model and a keyword model, to be able to do that for her. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the Zoom ID, and I'm passing it to the Zoom API. And the Zoom API will send back the transcription of the course along with recording link and password and various different attributes. As a matter of fact, here's the endpoint right here. This is the one I found. It'll give me back all this data. So I found that down here is a download URL, and then one of these in my eyes are going is the transcript. So I hit this little button, and what actually just happened was Zoom brings back the transcription. Now, so here's the long form. This is just the Gettysburg Address. I'm going to hit this button. I'm going to send it to Monkey Learn, and now the Monkey Learn model through an API came back and put that into the summary field, and actually it looks like there's some data in there as well too. And so I'm going to do the keyword extractor through Monkey Learn, and it's going to go up to Monkey Learn, and it's going to pull some of the keywords, sort of a word cloud type concept here, and pull them into this record. So machine learning, not CoreML. This is totally usable on Windows or whatever platform you need. This works inside WebDirect. It works on iOS. It works on Pro. Whatever it is that you need, you'll get that support. So those are some examples of general type models and vision models. And while I take a breath and a sip, I wanted to see if anybody has any questions on the machine learning stuff in general.
When can we have it analyze our DDR to tell how bad a solution is?
Don't we already, though, actually? Yeah, in all seriousness, that could actually be a model. You would have to define bad and what data parameters indicate bad, but that's something that's very real. And I hope, for those of you that weren't maybe interested in machine learning. Hopefully this enlightens you to play around with it and have some fun with it, and to be able to find business cases for your clients, or at the very least recognize how much machine learning is around us. You know, with deference to Claris, while this is exciting for us in the Claris world, we're very late to the party here on machine learning. This is not like a new novel concept. This is something that's got a lot of gray hairs on it. And for that reason, I think it's something that we can feel confident leveraging. Okay, the switching gears into a couple of quick ones. First, NFC reading. This is something that's also supported inside of the FileMaker platform. Specifically, you'll need to, if you want to actually build this into your applications, you can look at the help system here. You know, everybody loves a presenter just showing the help system. I guess I could just walk away at this point. But you see what the compatibilities are. This is a FileMaker Go thing, right? And it has to do with the fact that it's iOS that actually has the support for NFC. And you know that already, because for those of you that use Apple Pay, that entire thing is an NFC experience. This is not too unlike the iBeacons, Jesus, wow. The iBeacons, which were something that were introduced into the platform a few versions ago. In the case of iBeacons are a little thing that you stick, you know, on a wall or wherever you want to stick it, and it can give off up to a 30-foot radius. Like it's like a low frequency Bluetooth up to about 30 feet, and you can kind of pair that in as you configure your iBeacons. But NFC is a much shorter range, or a much smaller range. RFID is also something that's actually familiar. It has a longer range. But the NFC, it's near field communication. So the near field is specifically within 4 inches. So tapping your phone for Apple Pay, really, you know, in contactless world that we're in, you can just get kind of close. You just got to get within 4 inches of that in order to be able to exchange data between the thing you're reading and your app. So specifically, what kind of things can we read? Well, we can read employee badges, you know, various other types of things that have NFC configured in them. Or what I did is I went on Amazon and I bought, they were super cheap. They're these NFC tags. They're just little stickers. And if you look into the back of it, you can kind of see it's got like a little mechanism in it. It's basically a tiny little computer, which is, you know, pretty amazing. And what you can do is you can write to that little tiny computer and assign it a piece of information. So I'm going to show you briefly, very briefly, how to write one of these tags. I found an app that's called NFC. And again, this is one of those things, again, just letting you know, FileMaker doesn't have the ability to write NFC tags, just has the ability to read them currently, that is. So, oh, sorry. I thought that was maybe something that was relevant here. My bad. I didn't mean to open that in front of all you guys. So the NFC app, this is just an app that you can get for free. It allows you to actually write something to one of those tags. So for example, in my case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the ID of every product. So that my NFC story here is, let's say I've got an inventory room and I've got all my products in these little bins there. And then when the bin's empty, I want to reorder these things. And I want to do so by having the user take their phone and just, you know, tap it or get within 4 inches of the empty bin. So at the bottom of the bin, I put little NFC stickers on there. So what I have to do for every product that I have is go train an NFC tag. And I'm going to take the ID here. I'm literally just copying each ID. And there's ways to do this batch-wise as well. But then I go into this NFC scan, and I actually choose from it. I go into the NFC writer, which is the thing in the middle. That's that option right there. And I pick what I want to do. Here's all the different options that this app supports. But in FileMaker, we can focus on text. And I'm going to paste in what the ID is and hit save, and then I hit the right button, and this by the way is what configure NFC reading is. It has the little NFC reading card pop up, and you'll see in the configure NFC reading script step that when you're configuring this, you'll notice that you've got so you can say configure NFC reading, And one of the options that you have is a timeout, meaning after 3 seconds, if nobody has tapped anything or encountered any NFC tags, then just make that card go away. Or if it does pop up and it does encounter an NFC tag, you tell it what script you want to run and what parameter you want to run. So in my case, I'm saying when you encounter a tag, grab the value that you've scanned on that tag and pass it over to run a script and pass that the value on the tag as a parameter over to the script that's running in FileMaker. And you unpack that value by using the get script parameter function, like you would in other kind of workflows. So that's how you actually write the tag, and sort of giving you an idea of what the experience visually looks like. Oh, sorry. Here is, I just created some scripts that start a process, but this is what I did. I set up the configure NFC reading script step on a button in my workflow. I said, when you do find something to scan, run a script that's called order review. And if you don't find something, just time out after 3 seconds. And this other option here called continuous reading is actually kind of compelling. That means that you can set it for continuously reading, and you can tap a whole bunch of things and send a whole array of parameters and values over to your FileMaker script. So that's kind of cool too. And that support is in FileMaker 19 right away. And really the script that's running just has to have a step in there. In this case, I'm showing the script parameter just so that you can see what gets returned. Specifically, what does get returned, no matter what it finds, it's going to send back these eight parameters. You'll notice, for example, like the number 2 parameter is an error string. So if you don't encounter an error, then it's just going to be blank. And you'll see what that looks like here in my demo. But the thing I'm focusing on is the string value, I believe number 6. The actual string value is what I want to get back. So here I say, get value out of the script parameter that's being passed, get value, and that's the line 6 that I'm getting there. So let's take a look at what this might look like in production. They see that they're currently out of stock, and conveniently, we've placed an NFC tag at the bottom of the bin. So that way it's not only exposed when it's empty, but all the user has to do is take out their phone and tap on the NFC tag. I click out of stock. I see ready to scan. I tap the tag in the back, and then you'll see the information that actually gets passed. You'll see that it's an array of values, some of which were passed over. I didn't have any errors, so I didn't get something like an error string. But I do see the 8944 value, which is actually the product ID value that was written to this specific tag. So I hit OK. It performs a find, finds the correct record, and goes into the place order script. So I simply hit place order and hit close. And now it sends the order out, hits close, and updates the UI. With new NFC technology support within FileMaker Go, you can now... Thank you, Robot Chris. That file that I shared with you guys, not a heck of a lot to it. If we take a look at the script again, here I put in a bunch of different functionality into this thing, but this is the part right here. It's just pick the script that you want to run and potentially give it a timeout. You can determine whether or not you want to do continuous reading by sending it a true if you want to, or check the box as well, and incorporate NFC reading into your workflows. A really interesting question came up to me in a previous discussion. I intended to discuss the similarities of NFC reading and reading beacons, but someone also mentioned another common thing that we do when we're interacting with the world around us in our workflows in FileMaker, and that is scanning barcodes or like a QR code or something. So they're really kind of the same type of experience. The difference that I found was that in the case of, for any old timers on this call, you probably remember CDs burning CDs. So remember when the fancy newfangled rewritable CDs came out, so that when you want to add another song to your playlist, you don't have to chuck the whole thing? Well, that's really the difference here. A QR code or a barcode is a non-rewritable. It means like if you want to change that ID, you got to peel that off and go generate another barcode. A NFC tag can be rewritten with new values if you need to. So I guess that's really maybe the slight difference between a barcode / QR code type approach as opposed to scanning for NFC, for example. So, you know, I wouldn't say that this like supersedes anything else. This is very much like polling for beacons, and the same kind of logic applies as far as like the scripts that run when you actually find the thing that you're polling for. Any questions on NFC stuff thus far?
Hey, Chris, Jonathan, just one little comment. I've only played around with a little bit, but from what I've found with the continuous reading, it actually runs the script every time, the script you specify every time it sees a tag. So it's not that it accumulates all of the reads and then runs the script once. It's every time it sees a tag, it runs it, but then it's just ready to run it again when it sees another tag. Yep.
So the important distinction, and thank you for that, because I don't believe I positioned that appropriately. You can build an overall log of all the things that you've written in like a variable or something like that. But yeah, you're actually running it each time. It's just basically telling it to not stop reading is essentially what's happening. Right. Thank you. Excellent distinction there.
Sure. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that the NFC tags themselves can be configured to have multiple pieces of data, which FileMaker will read. So obviously, I don't know exactly what the use case would be. It seems like a lot of times it would just be like an ID or something like your.
Yeah, I mean, or, you know.
How big is the text field?
I haven't really tested the bounds of what's possible there in the text field. I've only sent it UUIDs so far is what I've been working with.
But it's not just that you can put a certain amount of text into one field. You can have it effectively return multiple fields. So, and FileMaker will give you multiple values. So NFC tags, and I didn't know a lot of them about before I started playing here, but you can have things like a URL, you can have a vCard, you can have an image even on an NFC tag. And when FileMaker reads it, it will get back all of those things as separate records in that one packet that gets returned. So there's just a lot of options that you could explore with.
Yeah, I mean, technically in that regard, you could pass it every single field of the record, you know, the record from FileMaker, and then let your script parse out which one of those elements it wants, like using a JSON parsing or something like that, for example. So, but to answer the question at hand, I have not yet tested the limits of that payload myself. Be interested to see what those findings were as well. Great comments, great saves.
Chris, I have something to share.
Yes.
We've been doing things with RFID tags, which is similar to this.
Very much so, yep.
But the advantage is one of our clients does bowls, and they place a bunch of bowls in a location. They wave the wand of the RFID tag. It grabs all the ID numbers of all the bowls, and then we have a script that runs that creates the sale for them. Or if they want to do inventory, they wave it against a whole block of bins.
Awesome. And
they can get like 100 IDs, and then we can import that into inventory and update the inventory that way.
That's
so
really
RFID tags, you know, create a much wider span of reading than the NFC codes. The other thing is we're doing this thing with point of sale with QR codes, that we put a QR code for PayPal on the back of a computer at a point of sale station. The customer copies or scans the QR code, and then it gets sent back to PayPal, and then we record the payment inside our point of sale.
So cool. Yeah, payment has been, you know, a big area for all these types of things, especially now with COVID, with the touchless transactions. Really cool use cases there for RFID. And really, this is just another, and I just want to be clear, my assessment of this is just, it's another tool to throw in the tool belt, another thing that we can use in our workflows as appropriate. It by no means is the better, newer, better version of any of those other options that we've discussed. It's just another cool thing that we can actually build in to our repertoire. And my speculation on this for the future of it would be that we see some ability to do the writing one way or another inside of the FileMaker platform as well too. So probably with some adoption, a lot more fun stuff to come here also. And I encourage that very helpful type of dialogue that you guys just shared with me here. The next thing I'm going to go to is shortcuts. While it's commonly referred to, and very much so by FileMaker, as series shortcuts, and I think that was probably because of the evolution of the name of the app itself. These are the app that we can communicate with now is just called shortcuts. I played around with the DevCon session. Probably the most fun I ever had at a DevCon session was back in 2016, and I did a session on URL schemes. And if any of you were there, thank you for attending. For those that weren't, it was the one where I tried to turn I tried to have a FileMaker app for certification questions. And when you got the question right, it went through HomeKit in the Wi-Fi and turned a lamp on green. And then when you got the question wrong in your FileMaker app, it turned it on red. It was sort of my homage to the talking fish thing. While allegedly I made it not work on purpose just so that everyone would cheer when I finally got it working. I actually was really trying to make it work the whole time. But the concept there was I was actually speaking from a FileMaker app to like the Philips HomeKit app and a bunch of other apps using something called a URL scheme. And you guys know what URL schemes are already because, like, for example, when you go into FileMaker and you say, send a link to the database, for example, I have to have a database open that's hosted, a link pops up and it's the FMP URL. That's FileMaker's reserved URL scheme that allows us to open up files and also pass it scripts and pass those scripts parameters and do all sorts of cool stuff. And the nature of my session then was just, how you can get one app on an iOS device, like a FileMaker app, to talk to other apps. And, we're all familiar with the sandbox restrictions that we have when we're on iOS. And that means that we can't directly have one app talk to another app. And that is a core tenet in Apple's, iOS security policy. And of course, they're a world leader in that position, at least. And so therefore loosening that up really didn't make much sense. So what you had to do is kind of imagine that each app has its own fence. If you want to get data over to the other one, you kind of got to throw the data over the fence and hope that they catch it properly. But that's what URL schemes were allowing you to do. Now at the time, when the DevCon session was being reviewed, someone who worked at Claris at the time said, "Are you sure you want to talk about URL schemes? They're kind of dying. Apps don't really use them anymore. It's really not a thing." And I said, let me take a shot at it and see what happens. And one of the things I discovered is that not all apps have support for URL schemes or callbacks, which means that I can say, hey, FileMaker, go send these driving directions to the Maps app, and then take the user to that app with the driving directions that I sent from FileMaker or something. Some apps allow you even to say, well, like I did an OCR one where I pointed an app at a document at another app on my device that was called Pismo, I think, or Prismo, that ran an OCR scan and then took the data from the scan and then did a callback or sent another URL back to FileMaker, thus exchanging data between those two apps. Now, when you didn't have support for that, you could use other applications. And I found, there's some that are called like if this then that and stuff like that. The one that I found at the time was called workflow.io. And it allowed you to create like very like Claris Connect type flows or if this then that things. Like you have like a trigger that makes something happen and then a bunch of other actions. Workflow.io, about 6 months after that, this is not related to my session at all, don't get me wrong, was acquired by Apple. And I thought, ooh, this is exciting. Maybe now there's going to be a safe, secure, controlled way for apps to be able to share data with other applications and not so much like through share sheets, which is a little clunky. And sure enough, workflow.io became shortcuts. I believe maybe it became Siri shortcuts, and that's where the confusion over the app name comes from. But Siri currently today in 2020, you can create shortcuts on your phone. I'm going to show you a couple examples of those. You can have Siri. Siri's one of the things you actually saw in the two examples I was showing you before, the hot dog, not hot dog. Oh no, not so much the hot dog, not hot dog. The NFC one, or no, I guess none of them I've showed you. I've done Siri so far. So let me first show you what the actual support in FileMaker is for shortcuts. And then then it's really all in shortcuts. And I'm actually going to tell you a couple of interesting discoveries in the last few minutes that we've got here, and some fun stuff that I encountered as I was playing around with this. Because it might seem a little underwhelming, but I'm going to do my best to convince you that there might be some usefulness here. So first of all, I have let me take you on this journey with this app I've created. This is a dog walker app. It's an actual app that I use. I want to track, when I'm walking the dogs, how far we went, how many steps I took, how far the dogs went, that kind of stuff. So, I'm doing a presentation, honey. Thank you. Okay. Everyone meet my wife. Say hi to Mrs. Ippolite. Okay. And my dog. Okay, here we go. So basically, she's about to star in this next demo, by the way, too. So what the app does is it accepts who the walker is, the human walking the dog, and then the dog, and then it takes, does some location stuff and does a timestamp of the lat launch so that you know where you started, and then you start the walk, and then you go on your journey. Now, the other thing is you have to end the walk so that you can capture all that information. This was a demo I did for when Get Sensor came out. So I'm grabbing a bunch of this stuff from Get Sensor. The real life problem that I solved with shortcuts and voice control through Siri was that, I got two dogs on a leash in one hand. I'm trying to get out the door. They're excited and they're tugging me in a certain direction. And I can't remember to start, and I'm picking the drop downs on my phone and I can't get those in there. Even more so when I was at the end of the walk, dogs are crazy, get in the house. It's just total chaos. I can't remember to end it. And all of a sudden I look in my pocket 3 hours later and it's still tracking all my steps and I'm getting inaccurate data. So what I decided that I would do is I would go into these scripts, the one that starts the walk and the one that ends the walk, and simply right click on it. And I would there's a new option here that's called enable short. It says disable now because I've already done this, but enable shortcuts donation, not Siri donation, shortcuts donation. And it puts this little Siri icon next to it. I've done that for both of these things in the Dog Walker app. And all I've done there is I've made them available to the Shortcuts app. So let me do a brief demonstration of this for all of you. And please forgive any background noise that you hear in the background here. But I'm going to scrub through this pretty quickly to give you guys a break on all this chaos over here. So first of all, a couple of tips. You got to enable FMURL script to be able to have shortcuts speak to your app, because that's what it's actually doing. It's behind the scenes, it's sending an FMPURL script. So that needs to be turned on. The other, I already showed you the donation part. The other pro tip is when we get into the phone. So here is, when you get into the phone, and in order for your app's newly donated scripts to be recognized by shortcuts, you have to go into FileMaker Go and open up your app at least once. Not every session, but just one time only. Then the iOS recognizes that those scripts are available. Then you actually go into shortcuts. And so I actually created two different shortcuts. The first one that I created was called Start My Dog Walk. The first pro tip I'll give you is that the name, it's a little clunky still, but the name of the shortcut is also the thing you tell SIRI to do in order to run the shortcut. So what I do is, you'll see here in a second, is I say, hey, SIRI, start my dog walk. And then it goes through the pantheon of different commands and it goes, oh yeah, there's a shortcut called start my dog walk. Let me do that. So first, in the interest of trying to create a use case that might be compelling enough for you guys to try this or find a business case for this, I am using shortcuts to not only start my script, but to use voice command to populate FileMaker fields. So what I did is I found in shortcuts that there's a a step, or, you know, kind of like we have an action in a Claire's Connect flow or something like that. There's a step in here that will ask the user, you know, it'll be SIRI asking the user who's walking the dog. And then it gets what's called a provided input, or like a variable gets saved by that. So what I did is I asked him a question, who's walking the dog? I set a variable and I call the variable walker based on the input provided in that step. I do the same thing in the next step. Okay, which dog is being walked? And then I save that input. That dog right there is the one that's being walked. And then later, I actually use the list function to create an array of all those values. So I take the first value of who the walker was, this, excuse me, the second value of who the dog was. And then finally we get down to the end where you see the new support. This is what's supported in shortcuts now, is the FileMaker Go 19.1. And in that case, what you're doing, you just saw me select a file, and I selected files that have a script that's donated. And then the next thing you saw me select was a script. Those are all the scripts on that file that were actually donated to shortcuts. And then finally, I run a script in there called start new walk. And then I pass it that list variable that I can then, in my FileMaker script, parse that out. So so basically, this is what that experience looks like. Sorry to all your phones within earshot. Start my dog walk.
Shortcut says, who is walking the dog?
Shirley.
Shortcut says, which dog is being walked?
Libby. And so what it did was take the voice input for Shirley, put it into the walker field, Libby put it into the dog field, then also started my script, which, you know, does various location stuff. And spoiler alert, I do the same thing for end my dog walk. And, you know, I had a little confirmation in there as well, too. I haven't figured out how to get the shortcut says thing to not pop up, which is a bit of a bummer. And then I looked into, oh, wait, that's the wrong password. Hold on. Then I looked into how do I share these things, because shortcuts are specific to your device or your Apple ID account if you turn on cloud sharing. So what you can, in fact, do is share a shortcut. So that means that what I did here, for example, is I just hit a little button that says install the shortcut. And I check to see, basically what I'm using is an open URL, because you get a URL for cloud hosted shortcuts, and then you can send that over to an individual, and all they do is interact with that, or basically on their phone, it pops up shortcuts right away. And then what it does is it actually goes into, this was sort of the disappointing thing. It pops up and it says, this was a shortcut called what team is this? It says can't be opened because this shortcut cannot be opened because your shortcut security settings are not turned on. There's a setting, which I guess makes sense, in shortcuts that's called allow untrusted shortcuts. You have to turn it on, or have your user turn it on right before they add the shortcut. It's not super elegant, but it's consistent with Apple's rigid security policies on the device. That won't show up unless shortcuts you've tried to load a shortcut. In case you don't see it, try loading it first. Once that's loaded, then the individual, so basically this is how you create a link. You just go into the shortcut and there's a little share sheet. That's what a link looks like. This is what the user, this is what the user sees, and they can hit get shortcut right there in that green button. They'll of course experience that, unless of course they've turned this setting off temporarily. But once they do, then you're able to share your shortcut and your app, and you can install it through FileMaker with some instruction. Now, I did reach out to the folks over at Jamf, the soon-to-go public Jamf, and ask them, hey, does MDM have control over managed devices that can maybe turn these off like wholesale? And much like all the other security settings, it does not. So, so basically the step of turning it on, you know, toggling it to allow, and then having users turn that off it's not great, but you know, it is secure, and I'm not too embarrassed about, you know, telling folks to do that because we like to keep their devices secure. So, so a little bit of shortcuts, a little bit of Siri, a little bit of sharing on the cloud. Hope you guys find that interesting as well too. And I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have pertaining to the shortcuts compatibility as well.
Hey, Chris, did you explore whether there's some way to make your shortcut trusted, like signing it, like apps are signed?
That's a good question, Jonathan. Yeah, right. Exactly like an app would be signed. The problem is I didn't find any settings in Shortcut itself, but yeah, kind of in the spirit of the MDM, who knows, maybe you can actually sign it when you load something on into your MDM or something like that. That's a really interesting point. I did not see any settings in the Shortcut or in the Shortcuts app to be able to do that. But to me, that seems like a logical way to do that, like literally sign those things.
Hey, Chris, a comment to your MDM comment.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
we've had a challenge with trying to get some of the machines on the lot configured for the new Jamf server. And one of the issues I ran into was there were some conference rooms that I needed to get on the server. And I was able to use an Apple script to enable it and disable it, the approve, because it has to be approved by the user. And by doing that, I was able to run the script and then delete the script, and the script would actually turn off and uncheck the device is allowed, the script is allowed, or script editor is allowed.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. So a similar series of steps, I think, is what we'd be looking for here. That's a good one, John. I appreciate you sharing that.
I'm just thinking that, if we ran into options where situations where we needed to allow it, we could use, if it's on a Mac, we could use Apple script.
Yeah, good point. And in these cases, they would be, right? Because we're running them on iOS devices. And Jonathan, you probably can coach us into the Apple script part more than anybody that I can think of. So that's interesting. So definitely, and I'm glad to get this kind of thought working, because when I first looked at this, I was like, oh, I can only run it on my device. Like, I'll do some fun demo things with it, and that'll be about it. But once sharing became a thing, now I'm like keenly interested in what's possible here. So I like to hear this dialogue, and I'm always going to be interested in any discoveries that you guys make. And Steve, you asked a question. I happen to agree with you that the Shortcuts UI is very confusing. I have never done the same route twice to the thing I'm looking for, and it always kind of leaves old cards open, and it confuses me if that's the starting UI. Point is, if you poke around for a while, you'll eventually find the input. I think they're under functions or something like that. I forget what it is. It's not under apps. And that's where you'll get the ask, and then where you get the input and the voice and stuff like that. And some great resources on the group chat on Zoom here for instructions on how to get shortcuts working there too. So appreciate you guys sharing that as well. And with that, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to entertain, but I'm happy to pass that back to our venerable host for any wrap-ups that you guys want to do here. And please enjoy the files off YouTube and the videos and the various other things in there. And certainly look forward to hearing any discoveries that you guys made on any of the topics that we've discussed here today. And thank you so much for having me. And thanks for those of you that stuck around. It really means a lot to me. It was a fun way to spend the morning.
Chris, awesome presentation.
Chris, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Hi, and thank you very much for being here today. I think you should have a sensor on your front gate that every time you walk through it asks you, are you walking a dog? It starts that whole thing.
It's such a great idea. I mean, that's a legitimate, like, real thing. Like, and I'm trying to figure out how to work this into HomeKit, because I have HomeKit open up my garage door as I'm, like however far away it is to the house, so that I can chuck the poop bags in the bins without having to fumble with my phone for the same reason. So I think there'd be an interesting way to do a "Are you home?" something within the HomeKit too. That's a really clever idea.
It could start your walk and it end your walk when you come back. And
now I know what I'm doing this Saturday morning.
Let us know how it comes out.
Hey, Chris, along those lines, you could maybe put something on the dog's collar that, so you know which dog was being walked and when the dog left and when the dog came back.
God, that's a great idea. And a lot of those like dog tracking or cat tracking things are RFID based technologies. Going back to the RFID thing, and like, or we could even use a beacon. But yeah, those are all very real things that have now entered our world and our app space in FileMaker. And look at how fun it is to pontificate over these things and imagine what's possible. So the really good ideas, and you guys got the wheels, the gears spinning for sure.
I wonder if those dog collars also have APIs where you can just grab the data from, from the web.
There was one that wasn't a dog collar, but something that did some tracking that I found the app had an API in it too. So I wouldn't be too surprised if there were some collars that had that same kind of thing. Once again, thank you so much to all of you and to the delivery guys and my dog in the background. Really, it was fun meet with you guys here today, and I can't wait till we see each other in person again sometime soon, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, great job, and great sample files. And again, one of the best things about a presentation is not show me everything, but show me a bunch of paths that have lots of question marks at the end of them, and let's all go play. And I think you did a really good job on that too.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it.
All right, if anybody else has anything else, great. We'll keep this thing alive, but otherwise we'll shut her down and get the recording rendering and share it up with anybody who missed it.
Thanks, Wim. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Everybody have a good night.